Hello everyone, my name is Catalyst. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing well. For today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the new Shutdown game mode in Battlefield 2042. This game mode is a limited time game mode that has come with the Leviathan Rising special event that dropped this past Tuesday. And I want to talk about the game mode because according to the Insider podcast that DICE puts on every once in a while, this game mode is DICE taking a stab at a more competitive mode for Battlefield. And me being one of the people crazy enough to have played organized competitive Battlefield over the past few years, I thought it would be good for me to share my feedback and discuss the game mode with you all as well. Because unlike some of the previous limited time game modes that have come in these special events, I think that DICE actually did a pretty good job with Shutdown as a game mode, and quite frankly, I was impressed. But it's not exactly what I would consider a fully competitive mode. So pretending for a second that DICE is actually interested in making a true competitive mode for Battlefield 2042, here is how I would transform Shutdown to become a marquee mode for more competitive players. Let me know what you think of the mode in the comments, and if you agree or disagree with my thoughts on the mode. Let's get into it. So for those of you that have not gotten a chance to play the game mode yet, here is how the mode works. Two teams take turns attacking and defending a set of 3 capture zones. The goal is to get as many points in the round as possible, and ultimately more points than the other team. In order to earn points, you need to plant what is called a lance device within one of the 3 capture zones to start downloading data and earning points. If you capture a zone completely, your team earns 30 points. If the defenders are able to defuse the device before the download is completed, the attacker's progress will be saved until they plant the device again. The mode works on points rather than zones captured, so a team can download data at all 3 objectives without full capping a single one and still win because they earned more points overall. The rounds are 7 minutes long, and each team gets a chance to attack. That's essentially how the mode works. It's a hybrid of a few different modes in the FPS space, but it's definitely got its own unique twist on things. And as it is now, I think that the mode has a good base for being a more competitive mode that DICE can bring back in the future if they wanted to. But as a mode right now, there are some things that are holding it back, and it's because it's a limited time game mode that has no restrictions. What I mean by that is that since this is a limited time game mode in Season 4's mid-season event, this is a game mode that is going to be tried by a lot of players, old and new, and in my opinion, if the game mode was heavily restricted, as most competitive game modes are, it would likely turn off a lot of players and the mode would not be very popular. But because DICE opted to have no restrictions at all, I think more casual players are enjoying it more than they would if their favorite gun or favorite specialist was restricted in any way. Many Battlefield players don't even know that a competitive scene for Battlefield even existed, and they have no idea that Battlefield at one point was a legitimate esport with LAN events and sponsors, the whole 9 yards. But ever since ESL pulled out and EA and DICE stopped truly supporting competitive play, not to mention the last 2 games not being particularly well received, the scene has kind of disappeared, and the $1,000 tournaments thrown by iBuyPower at the beginning of 2042 were the last money tournaments held. This isn't meant to be a history lesson, but my point in saying all of this is that the Battlefield community as a whole needs weaning into competitive type game modes because competitive play as a whole has not been advertised well in Battlefield since about 2016. So to wrap up that point, I think it's good that this mode is being introduced in this manner, even if it's not truly competitive, because there are no restrictions in gameplay. To the point of the video, here is how I would improve Shutdown to make it a true competitive experience for Battlefield. Now keep in mind, this would be for a fully competitive version of this mode. I think that there should be a casual and competitive version of this mode so that casual players can get into the mode and then jump into the true rule set of the mode if it ever came to exist. Oh, and I think this goes without saying, but this is my opinion, and it's subject to change if testing ever happens for a true competitive version of this mode, and my ideas don't fit as well as I'd like to think they do. First, let's talk about the mode itself and how it works. One thing that I think the game mode does really well already is establishing high stakes and tension that leads to organically entertaining matches. I think that the way the game mode works in terms of scoring is also currently really good because it offers more variety in strategy for how you can attack objectives. It's not as cut and dry as, say, Rush, for example, where you either get the bombs or you don't. Here you can micromanage and optimize to get the most points possible without necessarily getting the bomb completely destroyed, and I think it adds a very dynamic element to each round, as with 2 good teams going at it, no one situation will truly be the same. The only changes I would potentially make lie within the scoring system, and you'll understand why in a moment, despite it being really good. With that said, I would mess around with and think about changing the team size and the amount of objectives on the map. Although I think 8v8 and 3 objectives certainly works fine. I would consider changing this to 6v6 with 2 objectives. There are a couple of reasons why I think this could potentially work better. The first is that this would help create more teams. Say there are 3 teams of 8 players. If it turns into 6v6, 2 of these players get dropped from their teams, and they could create a 4th team. Smaller team sizes equal more teams playing. Now that's only if this ever develops into an established mode with tournaments and a comp scene and such, which it likely won't, but it's worth mentioning. Secondly, having a smaller player count and less objectives will tighten up the action just a little bit more. On a lot of the maps, there are 2 objectives that are generally close together, and then there is one that is further away from the deployment spawn. And I think that if you take out one objective to compensate for less players, not only does this present a better paced game, but this would also open up new opportunities for new and different map layouts, since you don't have to fit 3 objectives in one area. With more maps available, that would open up the game mode to best of 5 series. Now the default round timer is 7 minutes per side. I was toying around with the idea of replacing those 7 minutes with a ticket count similar to Rush, or even adding the ticket counter anyway in addition to the time limit, so it creates an either or situation. But I'm not sure that would necessarily play better without testing. Now let's talk about the Lance. The biggest change that I would make here is that I would want it so the game doesn't tell me when the Lance carrier has been killed. Instead of how it is now, where there is a big text that says guard that appears right over the dropped Lance, I think it would be better for the defending team to have to identify that the Lance has been dropped themselves. Right now, in casual games, when a Lance has been dropped, defenders can easily use this information to set up and punish attacking teams when both Lances have been dropped. And because these Lances have a timer before they respawn in the deployment area, it's very easy for teams to just camp around the Lances and wipe the other team for the 30 to 45 seconds that the bomb is on the ground. Having the game no longer tell you where the Lance has been dropped, I think, is a good solution. It forces the attacking team to not necessarily be careless with where they die and drop the Lance, but it also doesn't just give defenders free information on where their objectives are, because when you think about it, you aren't necessarily defending the capture zones more than you are trying to identify the Lance bombs and prevent them from getting to the capture zone. This way, defenders would have to identify the Lance on the ground without any HUD telling them that it's there and communicate with their team that the Lance has been dropped. And this should open up the map a little bit more to attackers to have a little bit more free reign, because right now this feels like a more defensive-sided game mode. Okay, let's talk about restrictions, and this is where most people will probably find objections with my changes, but friends, trust me, it's necessary. And we are going to go rapid fire here. Let's talk about weapons and attachments first. For those of you who have been around the channel for a minute, you probably know that I think there's a big time to kill problem with the game right now. Every gun beams you effortlessly from any range, so we need to be careful about what weapons are allowed, so there is a skill gap in the mode. I would prefer it if weaker weapons were used so there isn't quite so lethal of a time to kill. Let's get the obvious bans out of the way first. All shotguns and DMRs would be restricted, so that means no BSVM or any cheesy one-shot weapons like the railgun or the Ghostmaker crossbow. For assault rifles, we need to be careful here because of the headshot multiplier that is in the game, so heavy hitting, slower rate of fire rifles like the RM68 and the SFAR are easy restrictions in my opinion. Faster rate of fire assault rifles like the AEK, AM40, M16A3 would require some testing, but I imagine that these likely end up getting restricted as well. So that leaves us with rifles like the M5A3, AK-24, MTAR, ACWR, AC-42, A91, and M416. For the M5A3, I think this gun should be allowed, but the short barrel, close combat mags, and extended mags should be banned, so the time to kill on the weapon is lowered quite substantially. The AK-24 is a safe bet to use because it's a well-rounded, albeit weaker weapon in the meta currently. The MTAR and ACWR are really just bad weapons that I don't think many people would use, and the M416 is an option for players that are extremely accurate. For SMGs, it's a little bit simpler. The K30 and AC9 are easy bans due to their high rate of fire and low recoil, and the same treatment we gave to the M5A3 we will give to the MP9, banning extended close combat rounds and drum magazines, but allowing the weapon in the rule set overall. That leaves us with the PP29, which will likely be the weapon of choice, the PBX, which is good in the right hands, and some less powerful vault weapons in the PP2000, the AKS-74U, and the P90. LMGs likely won't be a big part of the meta because the sprint to fire delay on the weapons makes them extremely hard to use in a competitive setting, so I think it would be safe to ban the PKP and Advances and leave the rest untouched for those who are crazy enough to use them. Oh, and as a final note, the drum mag on the Glock would also be banned in my rule set. Buff the Glock, as the meme goes. Now let's go to specialists and gadgets. For gadgets, it would be easier for me to tell you what is allowed than what isn't allowed. Ammo crates and med crates are allowed, smoke grenade launcher is allowed, and that's about it. The recoilless launcher would be allowed, but only permitted to be used by 2 players on each team. We are taking out any explosives that can be ruthlessly spammed. This means that C5 and the SPH launcher are out, I'm afraid. Same for claymores, and obviously spot grenades are a no-go because it's cheap if the enemy knows automatically where you are in a competitive setting. Same goes for the Tugs device. Specialists. Okay, specialists are limited to 1 per team, which shouldn't be a problem because we reduced the team size to 6 in my version of the mode anyways. Let's start with the Assault Specialist. Zane is an automatic ban because of his airburst launcher. Sundance would be allowed, but her scatter grenade would be banned. Dozer would be allowed. McKay is one of the more controversial specialists, and in basically every 2042 competitive mode that I've played, it's been a huge discussion as to whether or not his grapple hook should be allowed, and I think in this game mode it should be banned, but McKay as a specialist should still be allowed. Moving on to the support class, every specialist here is allowed, but Irish's shield would be banned. Engineer Boris is banned because of his turret. Crawford is allowed, but his minigun is not, and same for Liz. She is allowed, but her launcher is not. For Recon, Paik is an easy ban because of her spotting abilities. Casper would be allowed, but his drone would be banned. Rao would be allowed, and Blasco would be allowed, but her infiltration device would be banned. Now, there is a bit of a controversial call when it comes to the insertion beacon, and I think that it would require a lot of testing to see how this plays, but I think it would be best to ban the respawn beacons outright. And the last thing that would need to be done would to be creating certain map restrictions in terms of out-of-bounds areas that players should not be allowed to go to, such as the radar towers on Manifest, but that would need to be figured out over time. But that's essentially the new and improved version of Shutdown. Now all we need is a spectator mode, right dice? Anyways, let me know what you think of my version of Shutdown. Feel free to throw your ideas down in the comments down below and tell me what you think of Shutdown as it is right now. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like on it. And if you enjoyed the video just that much, consider subscribing for more Battlefield content. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Catalyst, and I will see you all another time.